I would say that if there's an intelligent dialogue and the community decides that they want to have something, then many times there's a way that we'll get it. But we have to be clear on what we want it. I mean, in the San Fernando Valley in the 90s and the 2000s, everybody was not for anything. They didn't want a subway, they didn't want a light rail, and they didn't want the busway. And finally, since there was money to build the busway, we got that third world country solution. So it's just a matter of 10, 20 years down the line, if we can get the right idea and make the right decisions, we'll have that. I mean, way back when decisions were made to build the Blue Line with 2 cars and two car platforms, and the reality here is that I guess Tom's left, but Tom's got some colleagues that are well known that predicted in 1990, 1992, well-known articles. In fact, you met with the guy, Jim Moore, predicted that the Blue Line would basically have about 12,000 people a day if you have a ghost train. 12,000 people a day. I mean, the first month that ridership statistics were available was 18,000 riders a day. So it's kind of a question of, we've always been designing these things, and there's not been the capacity. Once we did the downtown connector, it's going to be a capacity issue, because even now they're probably not building the downtown connector with 4-car platforms, would be the. But you could run light rail with 6-car platforms, and if you do it underneath Sepulveda Pass with 6-car platforms, you don't have to run the heavy rail into there. You can run the green line under there just as well, and train capacity is the same. It's just cantenaries at the top rather than the third rail. So just a decision. But anyways, back to, since Bruce is here, any more questions for Bruce? I'm sure we do. Gentlemen, what's your name?
I'm Joe Drummond, and
hey, Joe.
I live in San Pedro and use the Harbor Transitway quite a bit. I came up here on the 445. Since the Silver Line has gone into effect, what's the ridership on the Transitway now?
I can't answer that question.
Anybody here can answer that?
I don't know what the Silver Line ridership is right now. I know the Blue Line ridership is pretty much holding steady through all this last couple of years. It's pretty much the same.
That's not an answer to my question.
Unfortunately,
that's not an answer to your question.
We actually have to admit, none of us actually know that answer, and
Well, doesn't MTA
but it's
know?
a legitimate question.
No, MTA would know. I just don't.
Joe, just be aware, he's a rail guy. He runs the rail operations,
Right.
and he doesn't. It's like.
Well, the Harbor
Of all the
Transitway
people
allegedly
here-
was to be upgraded to light rail. That's in the original plan. We'll never see it.
Unfortunately, since Tom left, Tom was actually one of the people that had a lot of knowledge on it. And since he left the room here, we could actually have gotten an answer to your question, but I apologize. The question timing just wasn't perfect. And I apologize for not knowing the answer to
We
that.
can get the ridership numbers. That's not a big deal. I'll get them apart.
We can get it to you, Joe. Next question, Justin.
Okay, before, well, I guess still, the Blue Line has over 3 times the number of riders on the Pasadena Gold Line. But after the regional connector is built, the 2 lines will be linked to Blue Line and Pasadena Gold Line.
Yeah.
Has there been any thought to maybe short lining the Blue Line trains at Union Station? Because it doesn't seem Pasadena would warrant that much service.
Well, it depends on really what we're going to get, and we'll know this before it ever happens, before the regional connector is completed. The foothill portion, the foothill extension from Azusa to Sierra Madre Villa is essentially 6 stations that have huge park and ride facilities, and the park and ride facilities will probably drive the headway, peak hour headway on that line. Right now we're at 7.5 minutes. If you ride a full line train in from Pasadena, 7.5 minutes, 2 cars is getting to be a pretty tight chore to get on board and ride all the way down. It's only a matter of time when we're going to be in the 3-car trains.
Okay,
So it's probably going to even up. If we have to use a short line facility, my thought is right now is we have a storage track along the cornfield where we're storing our cars right now. We take that one, we hook it up to the main line, and that becomes a de facto turnaround for South End trains if we need it. So that's kind of where I'm thinking about that one.
Next question, Bradley.
As far as the Green and Crenshaw line,
Yeah.
I was wondering how you figured how aviation station would be affected in that, in terms of right now that's kind of like the epicenter on the western part of the Green Line, and I wonder how you feel that would be affected when you tie those 2 lines together.
Well, aviation, you know, you look at the parking lot every day out there, totally full.
Yeah.
You know, the only trouble is about 50% of those cars don't belong to train riders. They're airport employees. Just go out and watch it for a few hours. You'll see these folks, they're walking over, they get on a shuttle bus. They're riding over to the airport to their jobs. You know, some of them use that as a park ride, a cheap park ride for the you know, going out of town for a weekend or whatever. That's an issue that's problematic. I actually think that aviation becomes really downscoped in terms of volume through there, because aviation, Crenshaw is going to come in west of it, and the only way it's any good to Crenshaw is if trains go to the east from Crenshaw. But if trains continue west, it kind of bypasses it. So, you know, I see it taking less of a dynamic in the future.
Do you see the ridership on the stations west of aviation getting improved ridership between on the aerospace industry side?
Yeah, only with jobs. You know, it's if we get down into Torrance, North Redondo to the Galleria, to Hawthorne, those things are going to be big time stations, and that will open up the Crenshaw portion of the line. Century and Aviation will be a big time station, providing there's some way to get to the airport out there. You know, the infamous people mover. It's a plan.
It's definitely a project that
Plan.
one would, well, I know, though the airport kind of moves in dog years. You know, every 7 years you get something happening, so it doesn't move very quickly. The people mover was supposed to connect all 7 terminals, and 2 years ago we actually had a series of meetings that lasted for 2 years long, and we actually got the folks from the airport to understand how the harbor subdivision, the green line, we call the Crenshaw line the Rose line. The reason we called it that is because Bernard Parks was trying to rename the Aqua line, which is the Expo line, the Rose line, and we just decided we had to give them a line, so we decided we would call the Crenshaw line the Rose line, and Metro has an option that they may be able to call it the Rose line. But as Bruce was talking about, there is a junction we call Grand Central West, which is at Century and Aviation, and theoretically you could have the harbor subdivision running Metrolink style trains from downtown LA along the harbor subdivision down to San Pedro or to Long Beach. You could have the Green Line trains, as Bruce was mentioning. The Green Line trains could come from Marina Del Rey along, have that shared 1 mile segment with the station right there, continue out into Norwalk and hopefully to Lausanne corridor. You could then have the pink line, the Rose Line trains going from the South Bay Torrance, going north along the airport and making the junction at that particular station, and continuing north to Hollywood and Highland, for example, as some sort of routing. So you could end up having the people mover, 2 light rail trains, and a heavy rail train at the corner of Century and Aviation. It's theoretically possible. We got the airport people to actually buy into it. And of course, in our meetings, we went through versions A through J of iterations, and each iteration, A had 3, B had 3. So they were actually willing to do a lot of the work to figure out, and they saw how this would all make sense. And since Metro was in the room, city planning was in the room, DOT was in the room, World Airports was in the room, all the agencies were there. So at least we finally got to the point where we got them to all understand how it would make some sense. So it's there in terms of that generation 2 years ago got set. So the airport isn't just thinking that it's just going to be parking lot business and nothing else. So there's lots of options, but we've actually changed their thinking there. So we have some more questions. Peter? Is that Peter?
I'm curious, I mean, you just mentioned something about airport employees taking parking spaces on parking rights. I mean, I think parking structures and adequate parking is so essential for maintaining and increasing ridership on public transportation. How do you plan on solving that problem? Because that's really hurting federal property, federal income, and this big, desire to improve, public transportation.
Parking structures,
big issue.
yeah, parking structures seem to be a really hard sell these days.